Real engravings of the 18th century can reveal hidden details of a past civilization. You can find really amazing things that do not fit into the traditional framework at all. There is only one big enough problem with studying engravings. Most of the images that are on the web have either been censored or are available in very low resolution, at which very important nuances are not visible. I was lucky to find a website containing hundreds of engravings simply in excellent resolution, where every small and seemingly meaningless detail is visible when the image is enlarged. But these so-called trifles can completely change our understanding of the religious movements that existed in the 18th century. These engravings make us take a fresh look at our world and find the remnants of hidden technologies. So, let's get started. I found a warehouse of engraved maps of the 18th century through the Stolen History Forum. I constantly praise this site, as it is the best forum on alternative history. It was recently blocked for several months, and a huge part of the information is now lost. Recently, the forum was restored. There is not as much information there now as before, but there are very unique things. Link to the new Stolen History in the description. Let's start with this engraving of the 18th century. At first glance, we see an ordinary one. Catholic cathedral. And there is even a Catholic cross over the entrance. But if we zoom in and climb up to the spire of the building, we won't find any more crosses. There are some balls on these spires. And we are even higher. We see something similar to a weather vane sitting on it like a bird. And also pay attention to the clock, we will constantly meet them on similar buildings. The next engraving is unclear what it is, but on the turret. There is a clock and a ball with a spike on top. Here's another interesting building. On the left, there is a bell tower with two types of clocks. It seems to have a cross, but it is quite unusual shape. The top of the bell tower is decorated by a man, either with a pineapple or with a bump. The building on the right is no less interesting. There are no crosses on the spires. There are balloons, like on modern churches. Only in our time, crosses are placed on these balls. And here it's just balls. And there's a huge bump in the center. View of the old town. We are trying to enlarge and find a classic cross. It's even signed St. Mary's Church. We see not quite a cross, but a bird on top. If you think it's a rooster, you're wrong. I'll show you this creature a little later today, to put it mildly. There is another church with a bird nearby. And only the lowest church is possibly decorated with a cross. Now let's look at the castle. There are only balls with a pike in the saws. The monogram on the right is interesting. 3 knights' heads are decorated with symbols. A wheel, a papal tiara, and a pineapple. Or something like that. And very important, since it is on a par with the tiara. But here we have Malta in all its glory. If we zoom in, we won't see a single Catholic cross. Only on the left, we see something similar to a minaret. One might think that Islam was practiced in Malta. But it's not like that. According to the official version, in 1565, the islands were transferred to the order St. John, and for 2 centuries, the Catholic order strengthened and rebuilt Malta as an outpost for the Crusades. In other words, this is the very heart of Catholicism, and there are no crosses at all on the engraving of the 18th century. In 1798, Malta was occupied by the French, and they were Christians too. So this is a very revealing engraving of a Christian farpost without crosses. And here we have a project of St. Mary's Church. There are already crosses here, but there are birds on the spire. A street of a European city. There is a cross on the dome, but there is a statue of an elephant at the bottom right. The building on the left is decorated with unusual animals. I don't read out what kind of city it is. I'll leave a link to Yandex Disk. From there you can download it all. Carefully consider. A completely European audience and such strange sculptures. 1779. St. Mary's Church. There are no crosses, just a weather vane. And this looks like a view of Messina. I could be wrong. Very unintelligible. But if this is Messina, then it is in Catholic Italy. The star bastions are clearly visible, but there are no crosses on the temples. But this mural is just a quest for observation. It seems to be an ordinary biblical picture. On top of the angels, God the Father with a ball in his hand, just below Jesus, next to the holy apostles. By the way, pay attention to this inscription. It's probably an old Hebrew letter. But there may be similarities with the Permian letter. On the left, a man in a crown holds something similar to a psaltery. We descend lower, we see high-ranking priests. Many have tiaras. In general, there are a lot of Christians. And most importantly, there are about 30 deeply believing Christians depicted here. But for them, for all of them, only one cross is depicted. And it is located on the staff of the person sitting next to Jesus. The cross is not depicted anywhere else. Neither the saints in the middle row have it, nor the priests at the bottom. It is not on the papal tiaras. All these people gathered around some mystical object. A strange engraving. It seems to be a Christian plot, but practically without the image of the main symbol of Christianity, the cross. And this is Dublin. It seems to be an ordinary view, but the lower strengthening of the rock, as if curved stone, raises questions. Beams? Somehow this house does not fit well with the lower capital structure. Here are some more interesting ruins. What destroyed this stone city? Small ships and such majestic ruins look very strange. And so we got to London. In the foreground, there is a very remarkable tower with a ball at the top. If you zoom in, almost all the buildings are decorated with flags or weather vanes. At number 32 we see a classic minor. But it is signed as a monument. A very strange monumental minaret in London. Building number 39. Decorated with something similar to a bird. And it we have St. Mary's Church. The whole of London is decorated with either weather vanes or birds. Here is an example, building 57, 58, 59. At first glance, classic bell towers. If you do not increase it, you might think that these are crosses. But when you zoom in, you can see that the left part of this cross is larger than the right, like a weather vane. Number 57. St. Clement. 58. The new church. Some kind of strand. I think the British will correct me. 59. St. Martin's. That is, all of these are churches. but they are decorated not with crosses, but with weather vanes. Look at building 50 and 51. The same weather vanes. And this is St. Sepulchre's and St. Martin. I found only one cross for the whole of London on St. Paul's Cathedral, building number 48. This is an engraving from 1730, and there is only one cross for the whole of London. This fact already raises many questions about the real history of Christianity. Here is another interesting construction of England. At the entrance, there are 2 Egyptian stels and a weather vane on the turret. Here's another structure. There is a large clock at the entrance and, as usual, a weather vane on the spire. The project of the church in Calcutta. What do we have on the spire? Of course, the main symbol of Christianity is a weather vane. But not only abroad, churches were decorated with weather vanes and other strange signs. Here's a look at the Peterburgs. There are some rather unorthodox crosses on this church. The church on the right is also not decorated with crosses. Let's go back to the church on the left. Nowadays it looks like this. Pronounced Orthodox crosses. And even in the 20s, she looked the same. But we do not see such crosses on the 19th century engraving. When was Russia baptized? In the 19th century or in the 20th? This is England again, and the church is decorated with a weather vane. There are no signs at all in the derby. Brussels seems to have crosses, but a bird is sitting on them. And there is another strange decoration here. Here is an almost spherical onion with windows. Quite an unusual thing. I will make a video about it in the future. And this seems to be London. Interestingly, this tower has a rather unusual shape. And on all the churches, we see the weather vane again. The quality, of course, is not very good, but the left jumper is definitely longer than the right one. And it's not a Catholic cross. Spaldina Church, no crosses. There's a bird on the spire. St. Anne's Church. There are no crosses. There is a big ball on top, and there is a weather vane on it. Manchester. All of its churches are also decorated with a weather vane. And this is a plan of Manchester, where there is an image of churches on the sides. The Church of the Holy Trinity with a bird instead of a cross. St. Anne with a weather vane. Liverpool. Before us, it seems to be a religious one. But there is only a clock and a weather vane. There is a complete feeling that the British worshipped the weather vane. Royal Street. And again we see the weather vane. A view of London, and here we can take a closer look at this strange tower. Adorns her balloon. The shape of the windows is also interesting. A very strange design of incomprehensible purpose. Lincoln Cathedral has one cross. And as usual, a weather vane. Another industrial English landscape. An interesting smoking pyramid. But here we have Moscow 1799th year. If someone didn't understand, this is what Red Square looked like before the arrival of Napoleon. Here I am surprised by the surrealism of what is happening. On the one hand, beautiful large buildings with columns and enfilades have been built. But the space between these buildings is covered with piles of sand or clay. The remains of blocks are lying around. Some strange people are selling something right on the ground. On the right, they arranged a canopy made of fabric, put some kind of table. The audience of the European kind. And there are also in Russian costumes. Could it be that the people who built such buildings could not level the area between them? It's very strange. A number of unusual-looking lanterns stand out from the general mess. Milled columns stand on mounds of sand and do not fit into this picture at all. As if these things were left over from a past civilization. And this is St. Petersburg again. It seems to be an ordinary view. On the left, behind the Hermitage building, probably the third version, we see the domes of the temple with crosses. If we zoom in, we will see not classical Orthodox, but slightly different crosses. Something similar has been preserved in the palaces of Venice. These are the piles of balls. Go ahead, and right along the fairway of the field, we see another temple. If you zoom in, it looks more like a weather vane than a cross. If you look at the right bank, you will see wooden bridges for mooring ships. These bridges show very well the level of the bank relative to the Neva. The drop is less than a meter, and the question immediately arises, how could huge buildings be built on such a low bank? Neva rises quite often, and even with a heavy downpour, the basements of houses will be flooded. People seem to already know about it, and that's why. Stairs to the house were built immediately to the second floor. It seems that the first one is simply impossible to operate due to constant flooding. In these engravings, the illogicality of building such buildings on a low bank, and even with windows almost to the ground, is very clearly visible. Here is another very interesting view. Although the artist depicted temples, it is completely unclear whether there are crosses or weather vanes there. The remains of the Admiralty's Star Fortress are more interesting here. And here are these preserved gates of the star-shaped bastion. The same gate has been preserved on the other side of the Admiralty. They stand very illogically, as if they were previously built into the wall, and recently this wall was dismantled. Another interesting view of this house. It seems to be the 18th century, but the roof is covered with sheet iron and has a very old look. There is a pile of soil on the Neva side, as if they were trying to protect the house from floods. The whole view of the house, as if it had recently surfaced from under the water. And this is a view of the other corner of the Admiralty. On the earthen bastion, there are the same lonely stone gates, as if the walls around them were dismantled. A gate without a wall doesn't make any sense. And this is the second meaningless gate, near the Admiralty. And this is Holland. This cathedral looks like some kind of workshop. There are clocks on the turrets and the beginnings of some strong ones. Here's another interesting picture. There are crosses on the temple. They don't look like Catholic ones. There is a bird on top. Peter and Paul Fortress. Look at the cross on the temple. Prospect State Boards in St. Petersburg. Many copies have been made with this engraving, but this one, which was made under the mastership of McCabe, in very good quality, and without late additions. Here it is worth paying attention to the water level in the canal. The buildings are built almost at the same level with the water, and they will be constantly flooded. Also interesting are the remains of an incomprehensible structure around which people are crowding. And this picture can be called a pop-up city. There are sandbanks everywhere, scattered boards and processed stones. About this building, you might think that it is being built. But it looks more like an abandoned, unfinished building covered with sand. And even if we assume that construction is underway, where are all the workers? After all, a team of 7 people cannot build such a structure, which is messing around with abandoned blocks. Moreover, nearby another brigade is trying to take away an abandoned block on a cart. It is trying to take away. If she had brought him, I think the horses would have looked the other way and unloaded closer to the building. But the most interesting thing in this picture is the flag of the Peter and Paul Fortress. A white cross on a red background. In my opinion, this is the flag of Switzerland. Who thinks what about this? Write in the comments. Maybe I was wrong, and this is the flag of Russia. Here is another simply wonderful engraving. View of the engineering castle. First of all, there is a very interesting temple on the left. I do not know what it is called, but if we zoom in, we will see 3 weather vanes, like on the churches of England. And now, if we go down to the lower right corner, we will see traces of a sharp rise of the field for several meters. And this is not a short-term flood. This is a long-term rise for several years. Look at these little houses. They are built in water. But nobody builds like that. It means that the level of the field, when these houses were built, was much lower. One might think that an artist has sketched a flood. But that's not the case either. The embankment of the engineering castle is not flooded at all. So these small houses speak of a sharp change in the level of the world ocean by several meters. The other engravings that I showed you earlier say the same thing. Collegium Avenue. There used to be a deep channel here too. The water rose to the top of the canal, that is, to the level of buildings. And in this engraving, these buildings were also built at a stable, lower level of the field. The level rose, and they had to be sprinkled with sand. Now we look at another Dutch city. And again, there are incomprehensible constructions everywhere instead of crosses. Here is another unusual church. There is a clock, there seems to be a cross, but the cross is decorated with a bird. And here's what kind of bird it is, I'll show you now. To do this, let's take this engraving. On it we see a temple and an interesting stela. The temple seems to have a cross, but the cross is not quite ordinary. And on top of the stela, a seemingly ordinary rooster is sitting on a ball. But if you zoom in, then this rooster has a very strange head, somewhat similar to a dog's. It is unclear what was believed in the 18th century, and what was the main religion, but definitely not Christianity. Temples in England, Holland, and Russia were decorated with weather vanes and birds with a dog's head. There are even more interesting creatures. Look at this fountain. There don't seem to be any secrets here. Pineapple as usual. But if we increase the coat of arms in the lower right corner, we will see an absolutely incredible picture. Are these aliens? Intelligent insects? What does that even mean? That's it. Watch my channel.